Florida is sold as a paradise, endless beaches, warm nights, and palm trees lining the highways. But beneath that sunshine exists a side of the state few dare to talk about. Imagine schools hiding unmarked graves, roads built over forgotten cemeteries, and towns where entire families vanished without explanation. This isn't just folklore, it's real history, criminal files, and survivor stories. In this video, we count down 19 of Florida's darkest mysteries, each one pulling you deeper into the shadows, each one more disturbing than the last. By the end, you may question if paradise was ever real at all. So go ahead, let the hum of the ceiling fan fade into the background. Let the night air outside press heavy with heat and settle in. Because what you're about to hear isn't just strange, it's true. And if stories like these are your kind of thing, consider subscribing. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Let's begin with a Florida story that proves even paradise can hide horror. A schoolyard should echo with laughter, but in Marianna, Florida, the air around the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys carried no such sound. Instead, for more than a century, silence covered the screams of children who had been sent there. Opened in 1900, the institution was created as a reform school with the idea of teaching discipline to boys considered troubled or delinquent. For the community around it, the large brick buildings behind the gates were seen as a place of correction, a place meant to give second chances. For the children who lived inside, it was something entirely different. Survivors later explained how discipline quickly became cruelty. They remembered guards dragging them into small white buildings on campus. The punishments were not typical spankings or even strict correction, but violent attacks meant to break them. Leather straps were used with such force that skin split and boys passed out from pain. In statements made years later, grown men described how these moments shaped the rest of their lives. The White House Boys, as they came to be called, were a group of former students who went public with their accounts of the abuse they endured. They said the White House building, ordinary from the outside, was in reality a chamber of punishment where whippings went far beyond discipline. One of them, Jerry Cooper, explained it in plain terms. These were not spankings. These were beatings, brutal beatings. Some boys never left. Records showed that children died at the school, often explained away as accidents, illnesses, or fights. But what disturbed families was the number of children who were listed as deceased without clear answers. In recent years, teams arrived with radar equipment to scan the grounds where whispers had long suggested graveyards existed. Their findings confirmed those fears. Rows of unmarked graves scattered under weeds and trees. Excavations uncovered dozens of sets of remains, far more than official documents had ever acknowledged. Even with science and ground-penetrating maps, so much uncertainty remained. For survivor groups, the discovery was both proof and heartbreak. They had told the world about the boys who vanished, and now evidence showed they had been right. Families of missing children continue to ask for details, hoping for names, hoping to finally bring their relatives home. Some families have waited for answers for generations, passing down the story that their child had gone to school and never returned. The institution that lasted more than 100 years closed its doors in 2011, but the damage had been done long before. It was less a reform school than a prison camp where young lives were taken or scarred permanently. Its legacy is not of rehabilitation, but of silence, secrecy, and suffering hidden for decades. If Florida could hide horrors in plain sight for a century, what else did it keep buried in swamps and woods? Hunters heading into the thick woods of Charlotte County in the mid-90s expected the usual. Signs of hogs rooting in the dirt, the thump of brush shifting ahead of them, and the stillness of swamp air. What they found instead were bones. Human remains appeared near trails meant for tracking animals, placed far off the main roads and scattered in the wild. It was a shocking contrast, the quiet of rural Florida hiding evidence of something violent and deliberate. Over the course of several years, bodies kept appearing or were later connected to the same rough area. The Gulf Coast swaths between Charlotte and Lee counties became a focus for law enforcement who recognized repeating details. Victims who were almost always men on the margins of society, often transient or homeless, often without family to quickly report them missing. Their lack of community ties made them both vulnerable and harder to identify once remains were found. Without names, it was difficult to trace their histories or learn who they had last been with. Investigators eventually linked these killings to a man living within driving distance, Daniel Conahan Jr. He was not an easy suspect to overlook. Authorities discovered he had a habit of approaching men with the strange offer of making money by posing for what he called art photography. The promise worked on those without stable incomes, and they agreed to give it a try. That decision, police later determined, often led them into deadly traps. In one of the most chilling discoveries, detectives retrieved rope, tape, and other ligatures from locations connected to Conahan. These matched the bindings found with victims left along the hog hunting routes. Survivors of his lures described how he pressured them into being tied up, staging photos that grew increasingly unsettling. Most of the bodies showed signs of restraint, with some mutilated so violently that authorities later described them as staged. Several were dismembered and dragged into remote clearings that few beyond hunters would even stumble into. Conahan was tried and convicted for a single murder, an identified victim whose case was strong enough to secure the verdict. Yet even within police departments, there was little doubt this man was connected to far more than what the courts proved. Detectives privately called him one of the most prolific serial killers in Florida history, a predator who understood that targeting the homeless meant fewer questions and slower investigations. The woods and swamps gave him cover, swallowing not just lives but evidence. The unanswered part of the story is not whether Conahan killed multiple people, it is how many he killed, and how many men vanished into Florida's pine forests, dressed in hog trails and low swamps, never to be identified. The ground itself still carries that question. From killers who hunted the forgotten, we move now to a disappearance that started with nothing more unusual than a short evening walk. Tiffany Sessions was a 20-year-old college student with a full life ahead of her. She lived in Gainesville, attending the University of Florida, and in February of 1989, she made what should have been an ordinary choice. Around dinner time, she told her roommate she was going out to jog. She left her apartment in shorts, a sweatshirt, and running shoes, planning to cover the same route she had been getting used to near her complex. That jog should have taken less than an hour. Tiffany never came back. The disappearance triggered immediate concern. Friends and family knew she was not the type to vanish or go off without contact. Within hours, searches were organized. Police scoured the jogging paths, ditches, and roadsides along the busy Archer Road area, while helicopters circled above. Her car, purse, and ID were all still in her apartment. Everything in her private space appeared normal, suggesting she had simply intended to be out for a short run. The lack of any physical evidence turned what might have started as a missing person case into one of the largest search efforts in Florida's history. The search expanded quickly. Hundreds of volunteers joined law enforcement as the days stretched into weeks. Posters with Tiffany's face appeared across Gainesville and spread throughout the state. Television crews arrived, reporting on the mystery surrounding a bright, ambitious college student who had seemingly vanished in daylight just a mile away from a large, active campus. Even as her case dominated headlines, a new wave of violent murders hit Gainesville later that year. The Gainesville Ripper killings eclipsed her disappearance in the media. As horror gripped the city, Tiffany's vanishing received less attention, though her parents refused to let her story fade. Her family poured their lives into keeping her name alive. Thousands of flyers with her picture were mailed and handed out across Florida and beyond. Her parents went on television and pleaded for information, hoping someone had seen her near the highways or back roads that cut through Gainesville. Theories developed as months became years. Some investigators believed she was taken by a predator who happened across her jogging route. Others suspected a practiced abductor, possibly even a serial offender, familiar with the area and its traffic corridors. Tips and suspects came and went. Individuals were questioned, even high-profile killers already in prison, but none could be definitively tied to Tiffany. The frustration for her family was constant. Without a body, even the simplest questions, what happened, when, and by whom, remained unanswered. Her roommate's recollection haunted people most of all. Tiffany hadn't planned anything unusual. She was just trying to build a consistent running habit, a small everyday routine that anyone might relate to. That detail made her disappearance feel even more senseless. More than 3 decades later, Tiffany Sessions is still missing. No remains have been located, no resolution has been confirmed. Whether she crossed paths with a killer or became the target of pure chance remains unsolved. While Tiffany's story is a blank space, other places in Florida carry reminders of death so heavy they are planted in the earth itself, like cursed trees that refuse to forget the blood spilled beneath them. Deep in Oak Hammock Park, just outside Port St. Lucie, sits a massive oak tree that has earned a reputation few sites in Florida can match. Locals don't point it out for its age or size. They call it the Devil's Tree, and for decades it has been spoken of as a place tied to death. In the early 1970s, a Florida deputy named Gerard Schaefer turned into one of the state's most notorious killers. Known for luring women with offers of rides and safety, Schaefer is said to have brought 2 victims to this very oak. Accounts describe him tying the women up, hanging them from the branches, and killing them in a way that forever darkened the quiet clearing. When authorities eventually investigated Schaefer's crimes, they linked him to dozens of victims, and the tree where those 2 women met their fate became an immediate symbol of the violence he carried out in plain sight. Over time, the spot took on a second layer, not just as a crime scene, but as a place considered cursed. Visitors to the tree say they hear faint screams when the park falls quiet, even in daylight. Others describe looking up and seeing dark figures standing in the branches or shadows circling their view without explanation. Many insist they feel watched when stepping near the trunk, as if something lingers there with intent. At different points, county workers attempted to clear the site. Stories from the late 1970s and 80s claim that men sent in with chainsaws found their equipment failing, or their projects halted by sudden accidents and injuries. Work on cutting down the oak was abandoned after repeated problems, and the idea spread that the tree simply refused to fall. Authorities have often pushed back on more sensational claims. Tales of dark rituals carried out under its canopy with candles and symbols carved into bark are said to be exaggerated by thrill seekers. Yet at the same time, deputies also documented the tree as a gathering spot for groups that practiced occult ceremonies well into the 1990s. Even today, visitors leave behind objects, bones from animals, scraps of cloth, and graffiti, adding to the tree's reputation. Legends continue to grow. Some warn that anyone who dares to cut a piece of the tree brings it home only to find the wood bleeding red sap, cursed with an energy that causes misfortune. Teenagers tell each other they will hear whispers if they touch the trunk after dark. For relatives of Schaefer's suspected victims, the attention is bittersweet. They worry the ghost stories and the devil's nickname distract from the truth, that this was not a fairy tale, but a site where real women were murdered by a man believed to have killed many more. Whether cursed or not, the oak became a shrine to something much darker than folklore, and while the Devil's Tree unsettles those who visit, an even smaller object kept in Key West has spread fear far beyond Florida's borders, a child's doll said to carry a curse of its own. Behind a glass case in a Key West museum sits a child-sized figure dressed in a sailor's outfit. His face is worn, his small black eyes stare out without expression, and visitors whisper his name with caution. He is Robert the Doll, credited with decades of accidents, strange events, and tragedies that believers tie to his presence. Even in a state filled with haunted sites, Robert has become something unique, an ordinary toy that carries an extraordinary reputation. The story begins in 1904, when a young boy named Robert Eugene Otto was given the doll as a gift. Some say it came from a servant of the family, while others suggest it was purchased new, but either way, the child quickly grew attached to it. Otto dressed the doll in a sailor's suit that resembled his own and gave it his name. From then on, everyone called the toy Robert, while the boy himself went by Gene. Neighbors soon reported unsettling experiences. They claimed the doll moved on its own. Laughter was heard coming from the empty house. At times, Robert was seen in second-story windows, peering out as though keeping watch. Inside the Otto household, Gene explained misbehavior and broken items by pointing to the doll. If something went wrong, it wasn't him to blame. It was Robert. What might have been dismissed as a harmless childhood phase did not end when Gene became an adult. Even after he grew up and married, Robert remained in the house. His wife, Anne, was disturbed by Gene's insistence on keeping the doll close. Visitors noticed it was not hidden away like a childhood toy, but placed carefully in chairs, as if keeping its own place in the family home. The reputation spread through town. Stories formed about what happened to people who mocked Robert or treated him carelessly. Locals believed harm would follow disrespect. Car accidents, lost jobs, and sudden illness were just some of the misfortunes connected back to those who failed to take him seriously. Over time, Gene passed away, and Robert moved into public care. Today he sits at Fort East Martello Museum, sealed behind protective glass, where thousands still come each year to see him. But the rules remain the same. Visitors are warned not to take Robert's photo without first asking for his permission. Those who ignore the warning often end up writing letters back to the museum. Dozens of apology notes arrive claiming that disrespect toward Robert brought personal disasters ranging from failed marriages to financial ruin, and that only an apology might reverse the outcome. Even staff who work near Robert admit to unusual experiences after hours. Some say they hear small footsteps echoing in adjoining hallways when no one is inside. Others notice shifting shadows near his case, as though he still moves when no one is watching. Whether haunted or not, Robert has grown into something more than a doll. His legacy is a simple caution for anyone who visits. Never laugh at him, never question him, and never take a photo without asking first. From cursed toys to cursed highways, Florida has even built roads over the dead, where restless spirits are said to linger beneath the asphalt. A haunted highway, blamed for countless accidents, runs straight through Central Florida. Interstate 4, a major road that carries millions of travelers across the state, has one stretch near Sanford that locals warn about. They call it the I-4 Dead Zone, a mile of asphalt that hides a story very few drivers know. Before it became part of a busy interstate, the land beneath it was a small rural cemetery. In the 1960s, when road builders carved through fields and farms, they came across graves belonging to a family of German immigrants. Instead of rerouting or carefully moving the resting place, the construction pushed forward, covering plots that had been marked for generations. According to legend, 4 wooden crosses once stood there, marking the simple graves. They were unassuming, visible reminders for the local families who had lived in the area. During construction, those markers disappeared along with the cemetery. To many in the community, that act of disrespect was a curse in the making. They believed that disturbing the resting ground in such a careless way brought misfortune not just to the builders but to anyone driving over it. Not long after, stories of strange experiences began to circulate. Drivers talked about radios cutting out as soon as they entered the strip of highway, sudden static that made no sense for cars in working order. Others told of fog rolling across the asphalt in perfect weather, so thick that headlights couldn't pierce through it. Some claimed to see figures standing on the side of the road that disappeared when approached. For many travelers, the mile felt unnaturally heavy, as if the air itself pressed down. Folklore spread quickly, especially once stories of crashes tied to the area were added to the mix. Tales grew of tractor trailers swerving into ditches without explanation, and families losing control of their vehicles in dry conditions. The legend built itself into something undeniable even to skeptics passing by. Yet, the Florida Department of Transportation published data showing no unusual accident rate compared to other busy sections of I-4. Statistically, it was average, but statistics rarely calm stories told by drivers who experienced something they couldn't explain. Some locals refused to drive that particular mile at night, choosing detours that cost them time but settle their nerves. For families who had grown up hearing about the original graves, each accident reported there seemed like confirmation. They still remind children of the wooden crosses and the families buried beneath them, as if memory itself is another marker left behind. Myth or reality, the I-4 Dead Zone remains one of Florida's best-known haunted roads. It highlights the state's long practice of building paradise over burial grounds, layering progress over history without much thought. If even modern highways carry a sense of haunting, imagine what it means when a young woman vanishes completely from her city apartment, leaving behind no trace at all. A 24-year-old woman disappeared from Orlando in January of 2006, leaving behind her neat apartment, her car keys, and her belongings. Her name was Jennifer Kesse, and her case has remained one of Florida's most unsettling mysteries. At the time, Jennifer had a successful job, a steady relationship, and a new condo that she had just purchased. She went to work on Monday as usual, spoke with her parents that evening, and then talked to her boyfriend before going to bed. By Tuesday morning, she was gone. When coworkers noticed she didn't arrive at the office, calls began going unanswered. Later, her parents drove over to her condo and everything appeared normal. Her toothbrush and clothes showed that she had gotten ready for her day. There were no signs of a break-in or of a struggle, but Jennifer herself was missing, and her car, which she always used to commute to work, was nowhere to be seen. This suggested that she had left as if going about her usual morning routine, only something stopped her before she reached her job. 2 days into the search, police found her car. It was parked at a nearby apartment complex about a mile away from Jennifer's condo. At first glance, the vehicle looked untouched, but investigators noticed it had been wiped down to the point of removing fingerprints. Detectives pulled the security footage from the complex, and what they discovered only deepened the mystery. A person could be seen driving Jennifer's car, exiting it, and walking away. But the individual's face was hidden with almost perfect precision behind a fence post in each frame of motion. Detectives called the footage frustrating. The camera caught everything except the one detail they needed most. The apartment itself offered no more answers. Neighbors reported nothing unusual that morning, and surveillance from her own condo missed her departure. Investigators considered scenarios. Was Jennifer abducted from her parking lot? Perhaps attacked while locking her door? Was someone waiting for her on her way to work? Or could it have been someone from her job, a colleague she might have crossed paths with? Every theory kept raising questions without leading to proof. Over the years, the FBI was brought in several times to review the case with fresh eyes. Yet no arrests ever came. No body was found. The only hard evidence remained, that single piece of video showing a nameless figure briefly caught in motion. For Jennifer's parents, that grainy image became unbearable proof that someone knew where their daughter went. But to this day, they continue to live without answers. Nearly 2 decades later, they still appear at press conferences, pleading with the public not to forget her name. Jennifer's disappearance has become a haunting reminder of how fast normal life can split into mystery. It is not a case of violence caught on camera, but of silence, absence, and one blurred frame. And while Jennifer's story remains frozen in time, the next event would erupt into chaos in the open streets of Miami, violence broadcast in the middle of the day. Cars slowed on the MacArthur Causeway one hot afternoon in May of 2012. Drivers leaned from windows, unsure of what they were seeing. On the sidewalk by the water, a man was crouched over another, tearing at his face with his mouth. It wasn't a fight, it wasn't a mugging. It quickly became clear that this was something far worse, something that would leave everyone who witnessed it haunted. The man attacking was 31-year-old Rudy Eugene. His victim was 65-year-old Ronald Popo, who had been homeless for decades and often lived along that stretch of highway. The assault seemed to come out of nowhere. Witnesses later described Eugene stripping off his clothes before pouncing on Popo without warning. For 18 minutes, the assault went unchecked, while stunned passers-by called emergency services, describing a man eating another man's face. Most of Popo's features were destroyed before officers arrived. When Miami police reached the scene, Eugene refused orders to stop. An officer shot him once, then several more times, ending the attack. Ronald Popo lay bleeding, but somehow alive. He was rushed to Jackson Memorial Hospital. Doctors said that more than half of his face was gone, including both eyes. At first, there was doubt he would survive. Against the odds, he lived, and his story began to overshadow the uneasy question of what had driven Eugene to such madness. Initial reports pointed to synthetic drugs, especially so-called bath salts, which had gained notoriety for causing violent, erratic behavior. The explanation fit the public's shock. How else could someone carry out such a horrific act in broad daylight without any sign of restraint? Weeks later, toxicology results from the autopsy came back. They revealed no bath salts at all. The only substance in Eugene's system was marijuana. That detail unraveled the simple explanation, leaving something much harder to grasp. He had carried out this act with no chemical push beyond what millions of people used harmlessly every day. Popo, against all expectations, rebuilt part of his life. He endured dozens of surgeries and months of rehabilitation. He later spoke publicly, recalling that Eugene accused him of stealing his Bible right before the attack began. For many, that statement added a disturbing layer, suggesting psychosis or some private delusion drove Eugene in his final hours. Popo also expressed gratitude, thanking members of the community who donated to his recovery. Their support paid for medical care and provided him stability after years on the street. The attack was captured through frantic 911 calls and police recordings. Those brief pieces of audio spread across news stations worldwide, cementing the incident as one of the most horrific modern crimes caught on tape. To this day, no one has been able to fully explain what happened on that causeway or why Rudy Eugene's mind collapsed so violently. Miami had horror in the brightness of day, but in St. Augustine, terror lingers in the shadows of a lighthouse. Visitors climbing the narrow spiral of the St. Augustine lighthouse often say they can feel someone following them. The tower is 165 feet tall, And to reach the top, they pass 219 iron steps that circle tightly around the interior walls. For those who have tried it, the climb is not only exhausting, but unnerving. The echoes inside the stairwell make it easy to think you are overhearing footsteps behind you, only to realize you are the only one there. Many claim that the sensation of company never entirely fades as they go up. The lighthouse itself dates back to 1874, built to guide ships along Florida's dangerous Atlantic coast. It has witnessed countless wrecks offshore, storms tearing into the shoreline, and the struggles of the keepers who worked inside. The lives of these men and their families were tied directly to the tower, and accidents became part of its history. During its construction, one of the greatest tragedies struck when 3 young children from the Pitti family played near a cart used for hauling building materials. The cart broke loose and slid into the water, carrying the children with it. Workers tried to save them, but 2 of the daughters drowned that day. Their loss became forever linked to the structure itself. Years later, staff began reporting sounds of little girls inside the tower. Tour guides walking visitors up the steps said they heard faint giggles echoing from above, sounds that continued even when the stairwell was empty. On some nights, the playful tones mixed with the patter of running feet across landings that had no one standing on them. Paranormal groups that investigated the lighthouse captured recordings they believed contained childlike voices, further fueling the connection to the Pitti daughters. Other stories carried a darker tone. Caretakers described picking up the scent of cigar smoke hanging in the stairwell, drifting past their shoulders when no one nearby was smoking. Others noticed unexplained drafts rising in sections where the windows were sealed tight. Doors have been known to slam with such force that visitors startled against the walls. Old lockers rattled loudly during nighttime walks when only guides and their small groups were present, adding to the sense of being surrounded by something unseen. For locals, the site is not only a landmark, but the ground where their town's tragedies are remembered. Many view it less as a tourist stop and more as a graveyard disguised by a tower's light. Paranormal teams who set up cameras, sensors, and recorders inside the building consistently reported odd readings and unexplained sounds, convincing them that the lighthouse is among the most haunted places in the nation. To those who believe, the lantern still shines not only to guide ships, but to house spirits unwilling to drift away from shore. And if ghosts linger in towers, the question becomes what or who might have been behind the strange lights that appeared years later in the skies above Gulf Breeze. In 1987, residents of Gulf Breeze, a small town on Florida's panhandle, opened their local newspaper and saw something they had never expected. The paper published sharp, glossy photographs taken by a local contractor named Ed Walters. The images showed what looked like glowing disc-shaped craft hovering over trees and houses. Some of the photos had bright lights radiating outward, others showed the objects suspended in cloudless night skies. For a quiet community, these pictures set off a rush of curiosity and fear. Ed Walters said he had taken the photos from his own backyard. He described strange nights when he saw the objects appear out of nowhere, pausing low in the air as if watching him. The photos quickly became national news, and Walters himself became a household name. Journalists swarmed Gulf Breeze, setting up cameras in hopes of catching the same sight. UFO enthusiasts argued that the pictures were the clearest images of alien craft ever documented, describing them as proof that the phenomenon was real. At the same time, the community split in two. Some people swore they saw the same lights hovering over the town, flickering above treetops and darting silently across the horizon. Others believed the whole thing was staged, a prank meant for attention and profit. Neighbors told each other conflicting stories, widening the mystery even further. Skeptics pointed out that many UFO photographs often turned blurry or distorted, but Walters's were sharp and clean. The clarity, they said, was suspicious. Organizations devoted to UFO research pushed the case into the spotlight. Investigators from MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, hailed it as one of the best documented sighting cases in history. They argued that the sheer number of photos, combined with eyewitness accounts from multiple people in town, made it difficult to dismiss. For several years, Gulf Breeze became a destination for those hunting proof of extraterrestrial visitors. Enthusiasts camped on fields and beaches, waiting for the lights to appear, and some even claimed they did. Then came a turn. A later investigation suggested that Walters may have created the photographs using a model saucer built from foam and transparencies. A small model was reportedly discovered in the attic of his former home after he moved out. To doubters, this was confirmation that the photos were manufactured. Supporters rejected it, saying the model was planted or irrelevant. Even as accusations of fraud spread, UFO reports across the Florida Panhandle did not stop. Other towns logged mysterious lights, and witnesses insisted something beyond simple hoaxes was taking place. For Gulf Breeze, the frenzy became part of its history. Shops sold UFO-themed merchandise, and the town itself became synonymous with mystery. Walters even claimed direct encounters beyond photography, saying beams of blue light struck him, freezing his body in place as if he had been immobilized by the craft. Whether fact, exaggeration, or outright fiction, the Gulf Breeze saga remains Florida's most famous confrontation with unexplained visitors. From skies above to swamps below, the next mystery is about a plane that kept flying in ghost stories long after it fell into the water. A plane crash in the middle of the Everglades should have been the end of the story, but in this case, it became the beginning. On December 29, 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 left New York and was headed for Miami with 176 people on board. As the flight approached its destination late that night, the crew focused on a small problem. An indicator light for the landing gear wasn't working. While troubleshooting, they didn't realize autopilot had been unintentionally disengaged. The aircraft gradually descended until it slammed into the wetlands south of Miami. More than 100 people lost their lives in an instant, including the captain, Robert Loft, and flight engineer Donald Repo. Those who survived described black water pouring into the fuselage, debris everywhere, and the shouts of people struggling to escape. Rescue efforts stretched into the night, with helicopters hovering low and airboats weaving between wreckage under the glow of searchlights. The tragedy was devastating, but what came afterward was stranger still. In the months following the crash, Eastern Planes began using salvaged parts from Flight 401 that had survived the impact. Soon after, reports surfaced from both pilots and crew claiming they saw men who shouldn't have been there, men who matched the dead crew members. On multiple occasions, captains said they looked over and saw Robert Loft himself sitting in the cockpit. In some stories, he even spoke warnings about mechanical issues before vanishing. Flight attendants gave their own accounts. They reported seeing a man in uniform seated in passenger areas, quiet and still, only for that figure to disappear midway through the flight. Some said they recognized Donald Repo's face, watching them from the back galley or advising them to check the systems. The story spread quickly across Eastern staff, whispered between crews who didn't want to be mocked but felt unnerved by what they had seen. Passengers caught glimpses of figures too, and sometimes confronted crew members afterward, asking why an officer would vanish in front of their eyes. While Eastern Airlines never admitted to anything publicly, rumors circulated that executives quietly replaced salvage parts from 401 after the wave of sightings began. Officially, the company denied it all, but within the airline, the ghost stories refused to fade. For the survivors, memories of that night remained sharper than any ghostly tale. Many described the cold swamp waters rising inside the wreck, the smell of jet fuel, and the cries of strangers they could not reach. The crash was a moment of chaos and pain that left both scars and lessons. Safety experts took what happened and demanded updated procedures in cockpits that remain standard today. Flight 401 is remembered as both a tragedy and something more. It was disaster, rescue, and survival, and for many in the years after, a haunting that continued to ride the skies. From a haunted cockpit, we go back to the streets, where one strange house fire sparked the theory of human combustion. In 1951, neighbors in St. Petersburg knocked on Mary Reeser's door after noticing they hadn't seen her outside that morning. When they entered her small apartment, they found a scene that would puzzle investigators for decades. Mary, a 67-year-old widow, was gone. In her place were ashes, neatly gathered on and around the chair she had been sitting in. The strange thing was that her body had almost entirely disappeared. All that remained was a piece of her spine, one slippered foot still intact, and a skull that appeared unusually small, described as shrunken in a way fire alone could not account for. The rest of her chair had been destroyed. Its springs sagged in melted metal, and the spot beneath her was covered with fine ash. But the details surrounding it did not follow the normal pattern of a house fire. The rest of the room was left standing. A stack of newspapers nearby was untouched. Furniture only a few feet away looked unharmed. Instead of fire racing outward in unpredictable directions, it seemed to have happened almost entirely to her body. Investigators knew that for a blaze to reduce bone to ash, the temperature had to stay extremely high for hours. That kind of fire should have gutted the apartment, but instead the walls and decorations were nearly pristine. Police called forensic experts, who struggled to explain the scene. Some began to suggest one of the strangest explanations available at the time: spontaneous human combustion. Newspapers seized on the term, publishing large headlines about a woman who had possibly caught fire from within. The public quickly picked up the story. Gossip in the city grew until strangers were discussing whether a human body could ignite without warning, burning hotter than any flame in a fireplace. Scientific responses were more cautious, but they struggled to find another explanation. One detail they focused on was the greasy layer found on surfaces in the room. Tests showed melted fat had coated parts of the area, suggesting Mary's own body may have fueled the fire slowly, in what is now known as the wick effect. According to this theory, clothes absorb melted fat like a candle, smoldering for long periods of time at low heat. Experts pointed out that in such cases, small flames can consume a body without spreading widely, but very rarely. Still, even with this theory, questions lingered about how the temperature could have been so isolated and destructive while fragile papers sat inches away. For her family, none of the science dulled the horror. Mary's death left them with a chilling lack of answers. They wondered what could reduce their loved one to ash, yet leave her home intact. The strangeness of the scene has stayed in history books as one of the most unusual documented cases of unexplained fire. Science leans toward the wick effect, but for many, it still seems impossible, an unsolved case of fire from within. From inexplicable fire, Florida's next mystery lurks in the swamp jungles, where a foul-smelling giant is said to roam. Hunters moving through the wetlands of the Everglades sometimes describe a sign before seeing anything unusual. Long before any movement in the brush, a smell cuts through the swamp air. It is described as sour, like rotting sulfur or skunk spray. Then, in the corner of their vision, a large shape moves between the cypress trees. Those who claim to have seen it up close say it stands 6 to 7 feet tall, covered in thick dark hair, with glowing red eyes that catch light even in near darkness. For decades, this figure has been known across Florida as the Skunk Ape. Often labeled Florida's version of Bigfoot, the Skunk Ape entered popular culture in the 1970s. At the time, national tabloids ran photos and witness accounts of an ape-like creature running through the sawgrass. The stories filled headlines and morning talk shows. Locals who already whispered about strange sightings now had their tales magnified for the rest of the country. Almost overnight, the Everglades were reimagined not just as a wildlife preserve, but as a place where a hidden species might roam. Over the years, evidence continued to surface. Blurry photographs caught a large, dark outline moving away from the camera. Hunters brought plaster casts of oversized footprints, measuring far larger than a human foot. Some prints showed what looked like toes splayed wide, as if adapted for marshy ground. The uneven size and shape of these impressions fueled debate. Were they authentic signs of a creature undiscovered by science, or man-made hoaxes stamped out to earn attention? Skeptics argue the second option is the simple one. They suggest many sightings involve black bears encountered while walking upright, distorted by distance or fear. Others accuse pranksters of manufacturing prints and photos to sell stories to tabloids in the 1970s. Yet the legend has never gone away. In fact, it has grown more deeply tied to the identity of the region. Locals started to embrace the skunk ape as both warning and folklore. In some towns, themed festivals sprang up, framing the creature less as a nightmare and more as a cultural mascot. Families wore shirts boasting cartoonish skunk ape designs, while bands played swamp music under banners of the hairy figure. The festivals seemed to admit something important about the legend. Even without proof, the skunk ape belonged to Florida. For those who wanted a closer brush with the story, swamp tours offered their own angle. Airboat captains told visitors about strange calls echoing at night, or red eyes reflecting in the beam of floodlights skimming tall grasses. Whether it was real or not, guides knew the story kept people listening as the water slapped the sides of their boats. Unsolved or misinterpreted, the skunk ape endures. It is a towering reminder of how Florida's wilderness swallows certainty, leaving behind legends that linger in dark water and thick trees. And if one man could carry an obsession so far as to build a castle from coral, the question is what secrets he left behind when he died. One man, 1,100 tons of coral rock, and a project that baffled all who saw it. In Homestead, Florida, a Latvian immigrant named Edward Kalnin spent decades building a place that became known as Coral Castle. From the outside, it looks like a collection of massive stone walls, carefully aligned towers, and carved furniture, all cut from blocks of coral rock weighing several tons each. But the part people never forgot was how he did it, alone, at night, and without anyone ever seeing him use heavy machinery. Kalnin came to the United States after his life collapsed in Latvia. At age 26, just before he was set to marry, his fiancée broke off the engagement. Heartbroken, he left and eventually settled in Florida. In the 1920s, neighbors began to notice piles of coral stone gathering near his property. Little by little, the piles were shaped into walls, altars, a sundial, and even a crescent-shaped moon made from two large stones balanced carefully against each other. When people asked why he worked so tirelessly, Ed answered simply, he was building for his sweet 16, the fiancée who left him years before. The mystery was not just what he built, but how. Each block weighed thousands of pounds. Some larger stones topped 25 tons, equal to what cranes usually move. Yet Ed was a small, thin man suffering from ongoing health problems. He had little education, limited money, and no strong equipment beyond hand tools. He admitted to working only at night when no one was around, saying he wanted privacy. When neighbors tried to watch him, he would stop, waiting until the coast was clear. Ed claimed he discovered the secret of the pyramids. He never explained what he meant, but the idea caught attention. Some theories suggest he understood counterweights and levers so well that he used simple engineering to shift the stones. Others believe he may have had tools or knowledge lost to time. Scientists who later studied the site explained that physics could account for most of the work, though details remain uncertain. How he raised stones so high, moved them so smoothly, and cut them so precisely is still debated. Visitors today walk through gates carved from coral that weigh 9 tons yet swing open with the push of a finger. The balance is exact, and the gates once spun with ease on simple bearings. Chairs, beds, wells, and stars all stand as though built not by one man but by a large construction project. Yet records show no teams, no machines, only Ed and his nighttime labor. He survived on sardines, crackers, and an isolated lifestyle until his death in 1951. When he passed, Coral Castle stood quietly as both museum and puzzle. It remains one of Florida's strangest accomplishments, a monument born of heartbreak and pure obsession. From a devoted builder, we now turn to a different type of traveler, one who waits on Florida's dark roads, asking for a ride but never reaching their destination. Drivers on Archer Avenue sometimes tell the same story. A late-night trip along the quiet stretch of road brings them across a young woman standing alone by the edge of the pavement. She looks like she needs help, and when cars stop, she asks for a ride home. At first, everything feels ordinary. She thanks the driver, gives an address nearby, and sits quietly in the back seat. Then, without warning, she is gone. Drivers glance into the mirror, and the seat is empty. There are no sounds of doors opening. No chance she slipped away unseen. One moment she is there, the next she is not. This figure has been reported for decades. The description varies slightly depending on the account, but most agree she appears around the same age, early 20s, dressed in pale clothing, and always looking like she has been walking for too long. Some drivers say they sense sadness around her, as if she is both grateful and distant at the same time. The encounter typically ends the same way, with the sudden realization that the passenger has disappeared mid-ride. For some, the moment is confusing at first, until the cold truth settles in that no human could have left the car so quickly without being seen. Researchers who looked for explanations link the story back to tales of a young woman who died on that road decades ago. According to the local accounts, she was struck by a vehicle while walking home late at night. The story became part of oral history in the area, told quietly in families and then repeated to new generations. For those who believe in ghost lore, this accident is the origin of the phantom hitchhiker who still appears on Archer Avenue. Phantom hitchhikers are not unique to Florida. Stories of vanishing riders span across the world, from rural highways in Europe to desert roads in the American West. What makes Archer Avenue stand out is the consistency of details from those who come forward. Different drivers who claim to have seen her often describe separate but similar incidents, suggesting that if nothing else, the story has grown strong roots in the area. Several drivers even reported following through on her request for an address, only to later find that the house she mentioned had been destroyed long ago. In one version, the house had burned to the ground years before, leaving only a foundation. The revelation deepened the mystery for those who had believed her story enough to drive her there. Some skeptics argue that exhaustion or alcohol plays a role in these sightings. They suggest the figure might be an illusion born of fatigue, shadows, or misremembered late-night encounters. Others counter that many witnesses were sober and alert when it happened. Regardless of explanation, those who experienced it insist the passenger felt real, even leaving behind the pressure of someone sitting in the car. Hard evidence has never surfaced, but the repetition of testimony has earned the phantom hitchhiker a place in Florida's folklore. She is remembered less as a cautionary tale and more as a permanent part of the state's haunted roads. While one ghost may ask for help from strangers, a very different kind of predator once lurked in a public space where families thought they were safe, a shopping mall parking lot. Shoppers never thought their trip to a popular mall in Boca Raton would be their last. In 2007, a series of violent incidents tied to the town center mall left residents shaken and detectives searching for a suspect who has never been caught. Each case took place in parking lots where families felt safe, steps away from stores filled with crowds, bright lights, and cameras. The randomness of the attacks and the fact that no one was ever arrested still troubles the city today. The first case unfolded on March 23, 2007. Randy Gorenberg, a 52-year-old woman, left Town Center Mall around midday. She was last seen walking to her Mercedes SUV and driving away. Only 40 minutes later, her body was found near a civic center 5 miles from the mall. She had been shot, and her car was discovered abandoned elsewhere. The timing between her leaving a crowded mall and her body being discovered in another part of the city made the crime especially alarming. Months later, in August, another incident played out under eerily similar circumstances. A woman leaving the mall was abducted at gunpoint. This time, the attacker forced her into her own vehicle and drove for hours. Eventually, she was released unharmed but shaken after being robbed and threatened. Detectives noted the similarity to Gorenberg's case, but could not prove a connection. Still, the fact that yet another abduction started at the same shopping center made the fear in Boca Raton grow stronger. Then came December 12, 2007. Nancy Boccicchio and her 7-year-old daughter Joey had been shopping at Town Center Mall. Surveillance cameras captured them entering the mall and then later leaving with purchases, walking to their black SUV. Hours passed, and when they did not return home, concern grew. That evening, police found their bodies inside the parked SUV at the mall. Both had been bound with zip ties and shot. For investigators and the public, it was the most disturbing of the 3 cases: a mother and child abducted in plain sight, killed steps away from a major shopping center. Detectives worked to determine whether the 3 crimes were connected to one skilled predator or if they were tragic coincidences. Theories shifted between a lone offender targeting women at the mall and separate, unrelated attackers. What troubled investigators most was the lack of clear evidence. Surveillance footage showed only grainy images, including unidentified figures and blurred vehicles. None could conclusively identify a suspect. Witness accounts were limited, and physical evidence at the scenes provided no match in databases. Families of the victims lived with the randomness of the attacks. A mall parking lot is supposed to be public and safe, a place where crowds and cameras discourage violence. Instead, it became a stage for murders that were sudden, hidden, and cruel. The killings remain unsolved to this day, standing as a reminder that nowhere, not even the bright lots of Florida's malls, is truly secure. If criminals could strike so openly, natural disasters like Hurricane Andrew would leave mysteries of their own hidden in the storm's ruins. A hurricane's death toll is supposed to end in numbers, neat and final. In the case of Hurricane Andrew, that number was 65, but for those who lived through the storm in 1992, the number never felt complete. Survivors whispered of people who vanished in the chaos, never counted, never documented, their names missing not only from the news but from official records. Andrew slammed into South Florida with winds estimated at 165 miles per hour, leveling entire neighborhoods and leaving tens of thousands without homes. Whole subdivisions were reduced to splintered wood and twisted metal. The official reports kept coming in. People recorded missing, then later accounted for in shelters. But survivors told another story. They said in places so badly destroyed that law enforcement couldn't keep track, Some residents were simply gone. With paperwork lost, homes unrecognizable, and neighbors scattered, there were gaps no one filled. Even at the time, rumors spread rapidly. Talk of hidden mass graves circulated in Homestead and Cutler Bay, where destruction made normal recovery efforts impossible for weeks. People claimed that in the rush to restore order, the state prioritized rebuilding and restoring utilities over accounting for every single missing person. Families who couldn't locate loved ones clung to the idea that some victims had been buried quickly, without records, to keep official numbers low. Others insisted that missing relatives, never enrolled in evacuation centers, simply disappeared from any system that could track them. The number 65 stood in stark contrast to the scale of devastation. With whole housing developments obliterated, survivors wondered how the deaths could be so low. Some pointed out that South Florida had many undocumented residents at the time, people living quietly without papers. If they were killed in the storm, they may not have been included in any counts. Agencies would have had little incentive to bring forward figures that complicated the reporting. Beyond the plausible lies the folklore. In the days after the storm, when the coast stayed without power for weeks, whispers emerged about strange shapes moving in the darkness. People claimed creatures rose out of the Everglades, drawn into neighborhoods left silent by the blackout. These stories mixed with fear of looters, wild animals, and the unfamiliar silence of the city. While skeptics dismiss them as stress-borne hallucinations, the rumors remain a part of the Hurricane Andrew lore to this day, reinforcing the sense that the storm revealed something hidden in Florida's swamps. For families who still insist their missing relatives were ignored in the count, the pain is lasting. Official records gave them no closure, and government statistics remain at odds with their lived experience. In their eyes, the storm did not just take homes, it erased people quietly, without acknowledgement. Hurricane Andrew is remembered as a storm of total devastation, but for many, its mysteries never cleared with the skies. Beyond storms, Florida folklore lingers in quieter corners, like a strange cemetery chair that waits for the living to sit and listen back. Sit in a cemetery chair at midnight, and legend says you won't sit alone. In Casadaga, a small town known for its long history with spiritualists, sits a stone seat set into the ground in one of its older graveyards. Locals call it the Devil's Chair. The structure is simple, weathered brick shaped into a tall-backed chair that looks out over rows of graves. Many who pass by it during the day see only an odd piece of masonry in a cemetery, but after dark it becomes the focus of one of the region's most unsettling stories. According to those who live nearby, the chair isn't just a marker or decoration. Visitors who dare to sit in it after midnight often describe feeling an invisible weight pressing against them, almost as if someone else is trying to share the seat. Some have said they hear faint whispers in their ears when the cemetery is otherwise silent. Others insist it feels like cold breath on their neck or a hand on their shoulder, even while the rest of the cemetery stays still. The lore has built its own set of odd traditions. One of the strangest involves beer cans. It's common for visitors to leave unopened cans beside the chair as an offering. By the next morning, the cans are found empty, but often still sealed. To believers, this is proof that some unseen presence accepts the offering. To skeptics, they're simply props left by teens who poke holes in the cans later to exaggerate the story. Either way, the sight of discarded cans beside old graves has become part of the chair's identity. For thrill seekers, the chair has turned into a dare. Sit in it at midnight and speak aloud. Some treat it as an invitation to the devil, hoping for a direct encounter. Others challenge each other to last more than a few minutes without standing up. Accounts range from people running off, describing panic or nausea, to those who insist nothing happened at all. What makes the legend last is that enough visitors leave with a story convincing enough to keep the chair's reputation alive. Skeptics explain the experiences as fear mixing with silence in a place already charged with associations of death. They argue that being alone among headstones at night is enough to create the sensation of whispers or pressure. But even they admit the chair has an atmosphere that's difficult to dismiss. It's heavy, brick-built, and unnatural among the graves, sitting like a sentinel in a place meant for rest. Families who have loved ones buried nearby often say they avoid that part of the cemetery. For them, the chair is less a piece of folklore and more a magnet for disturbances they don't want around their relatives' graves. Whether the stories are myth or memory feeding on itself, the Devil's Chair continues to draw both curiosity and fear. It may not whisper to everyone, but the unease it leaves behind is hard to shake. Speaking of Florida's cursed waters, the coasts conceal darker legends, shipwrecks filled with ghosts of drowned sailors. Florida's waters sparkle under the sun, but just beneath the waves lies a graveyard centuries in the making. The coastlines here are dotted with reefs, narrow channels, and storm paths that have swallowed ships for generations. Records suggest thousands of vessels met their end along these shores. Spanish galleons forced under by hurricanes, merchant ships cracked open on coral, and even pirate craft brought down in skirmishes. What remains below the surface is more than wreckage. Many divers insist these resting places still carry something from the sailors who never returned home. On certain dives, people say the silence turns uneasy the deeper they go. Some claim to see shadowy figures moving across the wrecks, shapes that vanish as soon as flashlights hit them. Others report the chilling sensation of hands grabbing at their ankles, pulling them downward just enough to send a jolt of panic. In those moments, divers struggle to separate fear from possibility. Water pressure and human imagination mix in ways that make it difficult to know what's real. Yet the stories continue year after year, especially from the Gulf Coast. Unexplained sounds add to the unease. Divers inspecting broken hulls have sworn they heard knocking coming from within, steady and deliberate. The sound carried through the water like someone trapped inside a room, rapping against a wall for help. Rational minds point toward fish or waves, shifting pieces of wreckage. But once heard inside a sunken ship, the noise is hard to forget. For many, it adds to the feeling that the past still lingers, waiting in the dark corners of these vessels. Skeptics ground their explanations in biology. They point to nitrogen narcosis, a condition that can affect divers as their bodies absorb gases under pressure. The effect can alter perception, bringing hallucinations, confusion, or euphoria. A diver under nitrogen narcosis might see shadows that aren't there or hear voices in currents. It is a measurable phenomenon, one that explains many reports of ghosts in wrecks. Still, the fact that divers often describe the same experiences in the same places keeps the stories alive. For families centuries ago, the wrecks were tragedies without closure. When a galleon vanished in a storm, their loved ones were simply gone. There were no remains, no graves. Instead, their lives ended under the sea, where markers could never be placed. To this day, fragments of those journeys wash onto Florida's shores. Coins appear after storms, barnacle-coated guns surface, and glass bottles roll in with the tide. Each is a reminder of crews that never returned, small proof tied to immense loss. The ocean floor still holds larger artifacts too. Cannons lie scattered in sand, their barrels aimed at nothing. Cargoes of stone, silver, and supplies remain locked in rusting boxes, untouched for centuries. The line between myth and history blurs here. Stories grow from what lies just out of reach, hidden in water too dark or deep to ever fully reveal. Whether explained by science or spirits, Florida's shipwrecks remain both treasure and terror. They remind us that the waters, like the swamps and lighthouses inland, are never fully at peace. Florida itself exists between paradise and horror, shifting with every tide. Florida is often advertised as a state of sunshine, beaches, and vacations, but beneath that picture lies a much darker truth. Its history carries accounts of hidden graves, violent crimes, and unexplained vanishings. Every story reached back to the same contradiction: beauty above, menace below. Florida also holds a striking number of unsolved missing persons cases each year. Families search for answers in a place where disappearances can remain forever open-ended. In the end, the state forces a hard question. Was paradise ever real here, or was it always just a mirage built on bones waiting to resurface? And that's where we'll leave tonight's journey into Florida's shadows. If these stories unsettled you, let me know by leaving a like. It helps bring more of these hidden histories to light. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. You never know. The next time, it might be your hometown whose mysteries we uncover. For now, thank you for staying with me through the strange, the dark, and the mysterious. Until next time, keep your doors locked and stay awake.